King Christian IX of Denmark and his wife Louise of Hesse-Kassel had hoped their children would lead successful lives. This certainly became true. 2 of their sons became kings, 2 of their daughters became consorts of monarchs, and most of their children had happy and fulfilling lives. However, many tragic things happened to their children. Let's dive into the lives of the children of King Christian IX of Denmark. King Frederick VIII of Denmark was born at the Yellow Palace in Copenhagen on the 3rd of June 1843. His parents were Christian IX of Denmark and Louise of Hesse-Kassel. He was the eldest of 6. When he was just 10 years old, his father became heir presumptive to the Danish throne, and Frederick and his siblings became princes and princesses of Denmark. They had been born with the surname Schleswig-Holstein, Sonderburg-Glücksburg. Frederick grew up in the Yellow Palace and then moved into Bernstorff Palace. Frederick began his military training in 1860 and then studied at Oxford University, studying political science. He returned to Denmark in November 1863, when his father succeeded to the Danish throne. From then on, Frederick was known as the Crown Prince of Denmark, until his ascension to the throne. Frederick served as a lieutenant during the Second Schleswig War against Prussia and Austria. Later, he became Inspector General of the Danish Army and was a leading member of the Danish Masonic Order. He was given a seat on the State Council and assisted his father in the duties of government. His mother Louise wished for all her children to marry well. Initially, Louise had wanted Frederick to marry either Princess Helena, Princess Louise of the United Kingdom, 2 daughters of Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria, however, was opposed to this, as she didn't want any more of her daughters to marry foreign heirs and leave England. In July 1868, Frederick became engaged to Princess Louise of Sweden. The marriage was to help improve relations between Denmark and Sweden, which had grown tense during the Second Schleswig War. They were married on the 28th of July 1869 and resided in Amalienborg Palace during the winter and Charlottenlund Palace during the summer. Louise was popular with the Danish people, but experienced hostility from the Danish royal family. Frederick and Louise had 8 children: Christian, Karl, Louise, Harald, Ingeborg, Thora, Gustav and Dagmar. Frederick remained Crown Prince of Denmark until 1906. His father passed away and Frederick became the king as King Frederick VIII of Denmark. Frederick was a liberal ruler who supported the parliamentary system that was introduced in 1901. Frederick reigned for 6 years and was plagued by ill health during his reign. On the 13th of May 1912, Frederick made a stopover in Hamburg after returning from a trip to Nice. He signed into the Hamburger Hof Hotel under the pseudonym of Count Kronborg. The following evening, he left the hotel for an evening stroll. He did not return to the hotel, and the next day a search was conducted. His body was found on a park bench, and he was pronounced dead. His body was brought to a morgue, where it was confirmed that the king had died of a heart attack. On the 16th of May 1912, his body was placed on a special train to the Kingdom of Prussia, before being loaded onto the royal yacht and brought back to Denmark. He was buried in Glücksburger Chapel. His wife Queen Louise passed away at the age of 74 on the 20th of March 1926 and was buried beside Frederick. Alexandra of Denmark was born on the 1st of December 1844 in the Yellow Palace in Copenhagen, Denmark. She had 5 siblings: Frederick, George, Dagmar, Thyra and Valdemar. Growing up, she lived a very modest life, and her father did not have a large income. In 1848, Christian VIII of Denmark died, and his only son Frederick ascended the throne. Frederick had no children from 2 failed marriages, and a succession crisis arose. Frederick ruled in both Denmark and Schleswig-Holstein, where there were 2 forms of succession. In Denmark, both men and women could inherit, although male preference primogeniture was in place. However, in Schleswig-Holstein, only men could inherit. In 1852, it was decided that Alexandra's father would be the heir. Alexandra and her family moved into Bernstorff Palace, and although their status had risen, they received no increase in their income. By the late 1850s, Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom and her husband Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha were searching for a wife for their eldest son and heir, Albert Edward, Prince of Wales. Their eldest daughter, Crown Princess Victoria of Prussia, was enlisted by her parents in seeking a suitable candidate. Alexandra was not their first choice, as the Danes were at conflict with the Prussians over the territory of Schleswig-Holstein. However, eventually Alexandra was chosen as the only suitable candidate for their son. In 1861, Alexandra met Albert after Crown Princess Victoria introduced the two to each other. A year later, Albert proposed to Alexandra and she accepted. Though they had only met a few times and didn't really know each other, they were wed on the 10th of March 1863 in St. George's Chapel. The English court was still in mourning for Albert's father, who had died in December 1861. So ladies were restricted to wearing grey, lilac and mauve, and only Alexandra's closest relations were invited to the wedding, which upset many of her Danish relatives, who were not invited. After her wedding, Alexandra went by the title of the Princess of Wales. By 1864, Alexandra's father was King of Denmark, her brother George was King of the Hellenes, her sister Dagmar was engaged to the Tsarevich of Russia, and Alexandra had given birth to her first child, Albert Victor, although he was more affectionately known as Eddie by the family. Alexandra and Albert would go on to have 5 more children: George, Louise, Victoria, Maud, and Alexander John. According to Queen Victoria's diaries, all of the children were born prematurely. However, it is more likely that Alexandra misled Queen Victoria on the delivery dates, so that the Queen would not be present during the births of her children. During the birth of Louise, Alexandra contracted rheumatic fever, which threatened her life. Though she recovered, she was left with a permanent limp. The German invasion of Schleswig-Holstein had a profound effect on Alexandra, who grew to greatly dislike Germany. She and her husband supported Denmark during the war, which was a point of contention for her mother-in-law, Queen Victoria, and her sister-in-law, Crown Princess Victoria. Alexandra was popular amongst the English. She appeared dignified, charming, and affectionate. She greatly enjoyed dancing, ice skating, and hunting, much to her mother-in-law's dismay. With her husband, Alexandra went on many international tours, such as tours to Ireland, Austria, Egypt, and Greece. The Prince and Princess of Wales set up residence in Sandringham House and Marlborough House. Their marriage was mostly happy, although Albert didn't give his wife as much love and affection as she would have liked. They became closer when Albert almost died from typhoid fever in 1671, and their youngest son, Alexander John, died. Alexandra and Albert wanted privacy when their youngest son died, but Queen Victoria insisted on a period of court mourning and a funeral for the infant, which the press saw as a sickening mummery. Alexandra mostly looked the other way, as her husband had liaisons with other women and was perpetually unfaithful to her. Throughout her life, Alexandra suffered from several physical disabilities. She suffered from progressive deafness, otosclerosis, and a limp. When the ladies of her court and society at large saw that Alexandra had a limp, they adopted a similar limp in it as fashionable. 3 years in the late 1870s, Alexandra remained separated from her 2 sons as her sons went on a worldwide cruise as part of their naval and general education. Alexandra showed herself to be an affectionate and loving mother who wrote regularly to them. In 1881, Alexandra and Albert Edward travelled to Russia to represent Britain at the funeral of Alexander II of Russia, and to comfort Alexandra's sister Dagmar, who became the Tsarina. Alexandra undertook many public duties for the Queen and became the public face of the monarchy along with her husband. In 1892, her eldest son, Eddie, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, died after contracting influenza. Alexandra fell into a deep mourning and had his room and possessions kept exactly as he had left them, similar to how Queen Victoria had reacted after her husband Prince Albert's death in 1861. Queen Victoria passed away in 1901, and Albert Edward and Alexandra became the King and Queen of the United Kingdom. That same year, Alexandra and her husband cared for their grandchildren, while her son George and his wife Mary went on an extensive tour of the British Empire. Days before the scheduled coronation, in June 1902, Albert Edward, now Edward VII, fell ill with appendicitis. The coronation was postponed so Edward VII could recover from his surgery. Alexandra stood in for the king during a military parade and the royal ascot races to avoid public alarm. In August 1902, the coronation was held and Alexandra and Edward were crowned together. Alexandra's duties changed little, and she kept on the same servants when she became queen. In December 1903, Alexandra's woman of the bedchamber, Charlotte Knollys, saved the queen's life after her room began to fill with smoke. She roused Alexandra and brought her to safety. After Alexandra's father died, Alexandra and her sister Dagmar bought a villa in Denmark in order to retain their family links. They used it as a private getaway. Alexandra was denied access to her husband's papers and was excluded from some foreign tours and politics. In 1910, Alexandra attended a debate at the British House of Commons, becoming the first Queen Consort to visit the House of Commons. During a visit to her brother George I of Greece, her husband fell ill. Alexandra arrived back in England only the day before her husband died. On his deathbed, she nursed him and allowed his mistress Alice Keppel to visit. Albert died on the 6th of May 1910. Alexandra refused to allow his body to be moved, and only after over a week did she agree to have his body moved. She moved out of Buckingham Palace to Marlborough House and retained Sandringham House until her death. Alexandra did not attend her son's coronation in 1911, which was customary. It was normal for a crowned queen not to attend the coronation of another king or queen. She continued to work for the monarchy. In 1918, nephew Tsar Nicholas II and his family were assassinated, and she had her sister Dagmar rescued from Russia in 1919. Dagmar and Alexandra spent some time together. Throughout her senior years, Alexandra remained youthful in her appearance, but eventually the years caught up to her. From 1920, she suffered from partial blindness accompanied by profound deafness. Alexandra passed away on the 20th of November 1925 from a heart attack. She lay in state at Westminster Abbey before being buried beside her husband in St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. King George I of the Hellenes was born Prince Wilhelm of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glucksburg on the 24th of December 1845 at the Yellow Palace in Copenhagen. In 1852, after his father became heir to the Danish throne, Wilhelm's title was changed to Prince of Denmark. Wilhelm joined the Royal Danish Navy following his education at home. He attended the Royal Danish Naval Academy alongside his brother Frederick. In 1862, King Otto of Greece was deposed. Greece began to look for a new king, as they still wanted a monarchy and had rejected Otto's proposed successor. Initially, Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, was chosen, but the London Conference of 1832 stipulated that no one from the ruling families of the great powers could accept the Greek throne. Therefore, Wilhelm was chosen as the next king. On the 30th of March 1863, at the age of 17, Wilhelm was elected as king and took the name of George I. His ceremonial enthronement was held on the 6th of June 1863 in Copenhagen. George made visits to Russia, England and France before arriving in Athens on the 30th of October 1863. He quickly learnt Greek and dispatched his Danish advisors back to Denmark, so as not to appear to be influenced by Denmark. Throughout 1864, George toured the country and demanded that the Greek assembly adopt a new constitution. On the 28th of November 1864, George took an oath to defend the new constitution, establishing a constitutional monarchy. George quickly became popular amongst the Greek people. In 1863, while visiting Russia, George met his future wife, Grand Duchess Olga Konstantinovna of Russia. 4 years later, while visiting his sister Dagmar, who was married to the future Tsar Alexandra III of Russia, George met Olga again. By this time, George was looking for a wife, and a marriage to a Russian Grand Duchess would be advantageous. Olga was smitten with George and they fell in love. They were wed in St. Petersburg on the 27th of October 1867 and had 8 children. Their children were raised in the Greek Orthodox faith. Their children were Constantine, George, Alexandra, Nicholas, Maria, Olga, Andrew and Christopher. Their daughter Olga passed away in infancy. The king and his family lived primarily in Tatooine Palace, located on a 10,000-acre estate outside Athens, bought by the king in the 1870s. He established a winery, a Danish-styled dairy farm, and a royal cemetery. George also acquired Mon Repos, a villa on the Isle of Corfu, in 1864, which the family used as a summer residence. It is best known today as the birthplace of George's grandson, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who was born there in 1921. George's early reign saw constant upheaval with 21 different governments in 10 years. Attempts to return the Isle of Crete to Greek control went unsuccessful, which caused tension amongst the Greek people. Following the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878, Greece claimed Crete and the regions of Epirus and Thessaly, all under Ottoman rule. Eventually, the Ottomans ceded Thessaly. The political climate in Crete remained tense, and the Greek population of Crete revolted against Turkish rule in 1897. The great powers stepped in. Both Greek and Turkish forces were asked to withdraw, and Crete came under international control. While the Turks agreed, the Greek government refused and sent troops to take the island. When forces crossed the Macedonian border, war broke out. Greece lost severely, and following the defeat, King George lost much of his popularity and support and even considered abdication. The following year, in February 1898, an assassination attempt was made on the king and his daughter Maria, while riding in an open carriage. Both were unharmed and he received an increase in support. In the First Balkan War of 1912, Greece joined forces with Montenegro, Serbia, and Bulgaria in fighting against Turkey. This time Greece was successful, and on the 12th of November 1912 they took the city of Thessaloniki. 3 days later, George arrived and rode through the streets accompanied by his son Constantine and the Prime Minister. With his golden jubilee approaching, George I planned to abdicate following the celebrations. However, on the 18th of March 1913, George was assassinated after being shot at close range in the back. He died instantly. His body returned to Athens, where it lay in state for 3 days. Draped in both the Greek and Danish flags, his coffin was interred in the royal cemetery at Tatooine. Maria Feodorovna, Empress of Russia, was born Princess Dagmar of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Luxembourg on the 26th of November 1847 at the Yellow Palace. She was the second daughter of King Christian IX of Denmark and Louise of Hesse-Kassel. From 1852, she was known as Princess Dagmar of Denmark. Dagmar grew up in a happy family environment. Her parents placed great emphasis on giving their children a simple upbringing, but also placed great emphasis on their royal duties. Dagmar was closest to her sister Alexandra, and they remained close throughout their adult lives. In 1864, Tsarevich Nicholas Alexandrovich proposed to Dagmar, which she accepted. However, he suffered from ill health and passed away from meningitis on the 24th of April, 1865. His last wish was for Dagmar to marry his brother Alexander. Dagmar had already started to learn the Russian language and was preparing for her conversion to the Russian Orthodox religion. In June 1866, Alexander proposed to Dagmar, and they were wed on the 9th of November 1866, after Dagmar converted to the Orthodox faith. Dagmar took the name Maria Feodorovna. They moved into Anichkov Palace, where they would live for the next 15 years. They had 6 children together: Nicholas, Alexander, George, Xenia, Michael, and Olga. Maria was popular in Russian society. She did not dabble in politics much and devoted herself to her family, charities, and social activities. On the 13th of March 1881, Alexander's father, Alexander II, was assassinated in St. Petersburg. Alexander succeeded to the Russian throne, and the imperial royal family moved to Tsarina Palace, which provided greater protection. Alexander and Maria's coronation was also held in strict security. Maria and Alexander were extremely conservative, and Maria sought to encourage foreign policy that favoured Denmark and not Germany. Maria was anti-German because of the annexation of the previously Danish Schleswig-Holstein duchies to Prussia in 1864. In addition, she tried to get Russia to develop relations with the United Kingdom, where her sister was currently the Princess of Wales. Alexander and Maria often visited Denmark and enjoyed their time there because the atmosphere was more relaxed and they were under less stringent security. In 1885, Alexander bought a house near Frederick Palace, and it became known as the Emperor's Villa. Maria owned the house until her death in 1928, when her daughter Olga sold the house. On the 1st of November 1894, Alexander died from nephritis. Their son Nicholas became the last emperor of Russia and married Princess Alex of Hesse on Maria's birthday, just 8 days after Alexander was buried. Maria often offered advice to her son during the early days of his reign. Maria did not get along with her new daughter-in-law, Alex, or as she was known then, Alexandra Feodorovna. Maria was still considered Russia's first lady, and this strained the relationship between the old empress and the new empress. Maria was also more popular than Alexandra and enjoyed her role as first lady. As time went on, Maria's political views changed. She saw the discontent and revolutionary events that occurred in Russia and thought there should be a democratic representative government. However, Nicholas retained his absolute power, and soon Maria stopped being his political advisor, replaced with his wife. when the Russian Revolution broke out during the First World War in 1917, Maria was in Kiev. After Nicholas abdicated, she saw him one last time, and after some reflection, she went to Crimea, where members of the imperial family had several summer homes. Here she witnessed the October Revolution, and in 1918 she received the news that her son and his family had been murdered. Being in Crimea became precarious. Nephew George V sent the warship HMS Marlborough to her. 25 other Romanovs accompanied her over to England. After a short stay in London, Maria moved to Denmark, where she stayed in Amalienborg Palace for a time. She eventually settled in a holiday villa she and Alexandra had bought together in 1906. Maria's remaining years were overshadowed by the many deaths of her immediate family. Maria held out hope that her sons Nicholas and Michael, her daughter-in-law, and grandchildren had survived the revolution. On the 13th of October 1928, Maria passed away and was interred at Roskilde Cathedral. She had wished that she would be buried beside her husband. In 2005, Queen Margaretha II of Denmark and the Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed, along with their governments, that Maria's wish should be fulfilled. Her remains were transported to St. Petersburg and interred next to her husband on the 28th of September 2006. Princess Thyra, Crown Princess of Hanover, was the youngest daughter of King Christian IX of Denmark and Louise of Hesse-Kassel. She was born on the 29th of September 1853 at the Yellow Palace in Copenhagen. Shortly before her birth, her father was chosen as the heir to the Danish throne, so Thyra was a princess of Denmark from birth. Thyra's mother had high hopes of a successful marriage for Thyra. However, before any negotiations could occur, Thyra fell in love with a Danish cavalry officer, Wilhelm Freeman Marscher. Her mother knew of Thyra's interest, but considered it a harmless flirtation. However, Thyra and Wilhelm had relations, and Thyra became pregnant. News of the pregnancy was restricted to the immediate family, and arrangements were made for Thyra to be sent to Greece to stay with her brother George. She gave birth to a daughter on the 8th of November 1871, and the baby was adopted by a Danish couple. Marscher wanted to marry Thyra, as did Thyra, but due to his social status, this was forbidden by the king. Distraught over losing Thyra and the baby, Marscher took his life on the 4th of January 1872. It is not known how Thyra reacted to his death, as there is no record of her reaction, but I can imagine she was devastated and heartbroken. Thyra was a leading candidate for marriage with Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, the third son of Queen Victoria and brother-in-law of Thyra's sister Alexandra. Queen Victoria put a stop to any negotiations, as she thought a second British-Danish union would interfere with her pro-German leanings. Thyra was also considered as a potential second wife of King Willem II of the Netherlands. However, due to him being in his 60s and a shameless womanizer, Thyra rejected his proposal. In the winter of 1875, Thyra travelled to the United Kingdom to spend Christmas with her sister Alexandra and her family. Also visiting at this time was Ernst Augustus, Crown Prince of Hanover. Although Hanover was annexed by Prussia and had no throne, and Ernst Augustus was not considered to be conventionally handsome, he was kind and easygoing and had a large fortune. Thyra fell in love with Ernst Augustus. Apparently, he knew of her daughter and still wished to marry her. Thyra's parents, along with Alexandra, arranged a meeting in Frankfurt between Thyra and Ernst Augustus in early 1878, and they became engaged. On the 21st of December 1878, Thyra and Ernst Augustus were married in Copenhagen. They moved into Schloss Cumberland and had 6 children together: Mary Louise, George Wilhelm, Alexandra, Olga, Christian, and Ernst Augustus. Thyra struggled with her mental health during her marriage. It didn't help that her husband disliked gatherings and wasn't very social, which isolated the family. Nevertheless, the marriage was a happy one that lasted until Ernst Augustus' death in 1923. Although she was never a queen in official capacity, Thyra was the titular queen consort of Hanover, as her husband had never renounced his rights to the throne. Thyra was also the ancestor of King Constantine II of Greece and King Felipe VI of Spain. Thyra passed away on the 26th of February 1933 and was buried beside her husband at their family mausoleum. Prince Valdemar of Denmark was born on the 27th of October 1858 at Bernstorff Castle in Copenhagen. When Valdemar was 5 years old, his father became King of Denmark. Valdemar was educated at home by governesses and tutors. In 1874, he accompanied his father to Iceland to celebrate 1,000 years since Iceland's first settlement in 874. Following his confirmation in 1874, Valdemar enrolled at the Royal Danish Naval Academy. It was expected of him, as the youngest son of the king, that he would have a career in the military. Valdemar participated in several naval expeditions in the 1870s, reaching the rank of lieutenant in 1880. In 1883, Valdemar's 14-year-old nephew, Prince George of Greece and Denmark, enrolled at the academy, and they lived together at Bernstorff Palace during this time. George would later tell his fiancée that he developed a strong friendship with his uncle and had felt abandoned by his father at that time. In 1885, Valdemar became engaged to Princess Marie of Orleans. They married first in a civil ceremony in Paris on the 20th of October 1885, and then 2 days later a religious ceremony and reception was held at the Chateau d'Eu. Over 1,000 guests attended the wedding and reception. Valdemar remained Lutheran while Marie remained Catholic. When the Pope gave his permission for the marriage, he agreed on the condition that any daughters born from the marriage would be raised Catholic, and any sons would be raised Lutheran. The couple lived in the Yellow Palace and Bernstorff Castle. They had 4 sons and 1 daughter: Ega, Axel, Eric, Viggo, and Margaretha. 3 of their sons had unequal marriages and relinquished their position within the line of succession, as they had not obtained consent from the monarch. Valdemar had a lifelong naval career, which meant he was often away from home. He was appointed Vice Admiral in 1911 and Admiral in 1918. Valdemar was offered 2 European thrones, Bulgaria and Norway, which he rejected. His wife Marie passed away on the 4th of December 1909 after a long illness. Valdemar was away from home at the time on a long naval voyage. He would survive his wife by 30 years, dying on the 14th of January 1939 at the age of 80.